The sky was overcast, heavy with gray clouds that seemed to mirror the weight of the young boy's heart. His small frame trembled as he clutched a single wilted flower in his hand. His name was Ethan, and he was only 10 years old. His clothes were worn, his shoes barely holding together, but none of that mattered to him. All that mattered was the grave in front of him, his mother's grave. Ethan had been coming to the cemetery every day since her passing. His mother, Sarah, had been his entire world. She had worked tirelessly as a cleaner in the city, barely making enough to put food on the table. But she had always made sure Ethan felt loved, even when life was at its hardest. Now she was gone, taken by a sudden illness that Ethan couldn't even pronounce. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he knelt in front of the grave. "I miss you, Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't know what to do without you." Unbeknownst to Ethan, someone was watching him from a distance. A tall, well-dressed man stood near the cemetery gates, his sharp eyes fixed on the boy. This was Alexander Grant, a billionaire known for his ruthless business tactics and cold demeanor. He had come to the cemetery to visit his own mother's grave, a rare moment of vulnerability for a man who rarely showed emotion. But something about Ethan caught his attention. The boy's raw grief, his quiet strength, and the way he clung to that single flower stirred something deep within Alexander. He couldn't explain it, but he felt compelled to approach the boy. As Alexander walked closer, Ethan looked up, startled. The billionaire's presence was intimidating, but there was a softness in his eyes that Ethan hadn't expected. "Are you okay, son?" Alexander asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Ethan wiped his tears with the back of his hand and shook his head. "No, sir, I miss my mom." Alexander knelt beside him, his expensive suit brushing against the damp grass. He looked at the grave marker, reading the name. Sarah Thompson, beloved mother. "I lost my mother too," Alexander said quietly. "A long time ago. It's not easy, is it?" Ethan shook his head again, fresh tears welling up in his eyes. "I don't know how to live without her." Alexander hesitated for a moment, then placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You don't have to figure it out alone," he said. "Sometimes we just need someone to help us through the hardest moments." Ethan looked up at him, confused but hopeful. "Why are you being nice to me?" Alexander smiled faintly. "Because I see a little bit of myself in you, and maybe helping you will help me too." Alexander didn't know why he did it, but he offered to take Ethan home. The boy hesitated at first, unsure of this stranger's intentions, but something in Alexander's eyes made him trust him. They walked together in silence, the billionaire's sleek black car waiting at the cemetery gates. Ethan had never been in such a luxurious vehicle before, and he couldn't help but feel out of place. As they drove through the city, Ethan stared out the window, his mind racing. He wondered why this wealthy man who clearly had everything would care about a poor boy like him. But Alexander seemed genuine, and Ethan was too exhausted to question it further. When they arrived at Ethan's neighborhood, Alexander's expression darkened. The streets were lined with crumbling buildings, and the air was thick with the scent of garbage and despair. Ethan lived in a small, run-down apartment building, its paint peeling and windows cracked. "This is where you live?" Alexander asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Ethan nodded, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "Yeah, it's not much, but it's home." Alexander's jaw tightened as he followed Ethan inside. The apartment was even worse than he had imagined. The walls were bare, the furniture was broken, and the air was damp and cold. It was clear that Ethan's mother had done her best to make it a home, but the poverty was undeniable. Ethan sat on the edge of a worn-out couch, his shoulders slumped. "Thank you for bringing me home," he said quietly. Alexander didn't respond right away. He was too busy taking in the surroundings, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't quite articulate. Finally, he turned to Ethan and said, "How do you manage? Who takes care of you now?" Ethan shrugged. "I take care of myself. My mom taught me how to cook and clean. Sometimes the neighbors help, but it's hard." Alexander's heart ached for the boy. He had grown up in a wealthy family, but he had also experienced loss and loneliness. He knew what it felt like to be alone in the world, and he couldn't bear the thought of Ethan facing that same pain. "Ethan," Alexander said, his voice firm but kind, "I want to help you." You shouldn't have to go through this alone. Ethan looked up at him, his eyes wide with surprise. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Alexander knelt in front of the boy, his expression serious. Because I see myself in you, and because I believe everyone deserves a chance to have a better life. Let me help you, Ethan. Let me give you that chance. Ethan's lower lip trembled as he considered Alexander's offer. He didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to refuse, to prove that he could handle things on his own. But another part of him longed for someone to lean on, someone to fill the void his mother had left behind. Finally, he nodded. Okay, he whispered. Alexander smiled, a rare warmth spreading across his face. Good. We'll start tomorrow. For now, get some rest. You've been through a lot. As Alexander left the apartment, Ethan felt a strange sense of hope. For the first time since his mother's death, he didn't feel completely alone. The next morning, Alexander returned to Ethan's apartment, this time with a plan. He had spent the night thinking about how he could help the boy, and he was determined to make a difference. When he knocked on the door, Ethan opened it cautiously, still unsure of what to expect. Good morning, Alexander said with a smile. I hope you're ready for a busy day. Ethan blinked in confusion. What do you mean? I mean, Alexander said, stepping inside, that we're going to make some changes, starting with this apartment. Before Ethan could respond, a team of workers arrived, carrying boxes of supplies and tools. They quickly got to work, cleaning, painting, and repairing the apartment. Ethan watched in awe as his home was transformed before his eyes. The walls were painted a warm, inviting color, the broken furniture was replaced, and the damp, musty smell was replaced with the fresh scent of clean linen. This is too much, Ethan stammered, overwhelmed by the generosity. Alexander shook his head. It's not too much. You deserve to live in a place that feels like a home. But Alexander's help didn't stop there. He took Ethan shopping for new clothes, bought him a sturdy pair of shoes, and even enrolled him in a better school. Ethan couldn't believe what was happening. It felt like a dream, one he was afraid to wake up from. As the days turned into weeks, Alexander became a constant presence in Ethan's life. He visited him regularly, helped him with his homework, and even taught him how to ride a bike. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like a normal kid. But despite all the changes, Ethan still missed his mother terribly. One evening, as they sat together in the newly renovated apartment, Ethan opened up to Alexander. I'm really grateful for everything you've done, he said, his voice trembling. But I still feel so empty inside. I miss her so much. Alexander nodded, his expression somber. I know, Ethan. Losing someone you love is one of the hardest things in the world. But the pain you feel is a testament to how much you loved her, and that love will always be a part of you. Ethan wiped away a tear. Do you think she's proud of me? Alexander placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. I know she is, and I'm proud of you too. Ethan smiled faintly, feeling a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to move forward. As the weeks passed, Ethan and Alexander grew closer. The billionaire had become a father figure to the boy, and Ethan had started to trust him completely. But there was still so much Ethan didn't know about Alexander, about his past, his struggles, and the reasons behind his sudden kindness. One afternoon, Alexander took Ethan to his mansion on the outskirts of the city. It was a sprawling estate, with lush gardens, a sparkling pool, and a grand staircase that led to the front door. Ethan's eyes widened as he stepped inside. The interior was even more impressive, with high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and expensive artwork adorning the walls. This is where you live? Ethan asked, his voice filled with awe. Alexander chuckled. Yes, this is my home, but it hasn't always felt like one. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Alexander hesitated for a moment, then gestured for Ethan to follow him. They walked down a long hallway until they reached a closed door. Alexander opened it slowly, revealing a room that was starkly different from the rest of the house. The walls were covered in old photographs, and the shelves were filled with dusty books and trinkets. In the center of the room was a small desk, cluttered with papers and a single framed picture. Ethan stepped closer and saw that the picture was of a young boy and his mother. Is that you? Ethan asked, pointing to the boy in the photo. Alexander nodded, his expression softening. Yes, that's me and my mother. She passed away when I was about your age. Ethan's eyes widened. I didn't know that. Alexander sighed and sat down on the edge of the desk. I don't talk about it much, but losing her sort of changed me. I became angry, bitter. I threw myself into my work, thinking that success and money would fill the void. But it didn't. Not really. Ethan sat down beside him, listening intently. Is that why you helped me? Because you saw yourself in me? Alexander nodded. Yes. When I saw you at the cemetery, it was like looking at my younger self. I didn't want you to go through what I went through, to feel like you had to face the world alone. Ethan looked down at his hands, his heart swelling with gratitude. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. Alexander smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. You don't have to thank me, Ethan. Helping you, it's helped me too. It's reminded me of what's truly important in life. As they sat there in the quiet room, Ethan felt a deep sense of connection to Alexander. He realized that they were more alike than he had ever imagined. Both of them had lost their mothers. Both of them had felt alone, and both of them had found solace in each other. As the bond between Ethan and Alexander deepened, the billionaire began to think about the future, not just his own, but Ethan's as well. He had grown incredibly fond of the boy, and the thought of him continuing to live alone in that small apartment didn't sit right with him. One evening after dinner at the mansion, Alexander decided to broach the subject. Ethan, he began, his tone serious but gentle. I've been thinking a lot about your future. I want to make sure you have every opportunity to succeed in life. Ethan looked up from his plate, his curiosity piqued. What do you mean? Alexander took a deep breath. I mean, I'd like you to come live with me. Here, in this house. You'd have your own room, access to the best schools, and all the support you need. I want to give you the life you deserve. Ethan's eyes widened in shock. He had never imagined such an offer. Living in a mansion, going to a fancy school, having Alexander as a guardian, it sounded like something out of a fairy tale. But at the same time, the idea of leaving his old life behind felt overwhelming. I don't know, Ethan stammered. What about my apartment? And my neighbors? They've been so kind to me. Alexander nodded, understanding the boy's hesitation. I know it's a big decision, and I don't want to pressure you. But think about it, Ethan. You'd have stability, security, and a chance to build a bright future, and you'd still be able to visit your old neighborhood whenever you want. Ethan looked down at his hands, his mind racing. He thought about his mother and how hard she had worked to provide for him. He thought about the struggles he had faced since her passing. And then he thought about Alexander, the man who had shown him kindness when he needed it most. Can I think about it? Ethan asked quietly. Of course, Alexander replied. Take all the time you need. Over the next few days, Ethan wrestled with the decision. He talked to his neighbors who encouraged him to seize the opportunity. He visited his mother's grave, where he whispered his fears and hopes. And finally he made up his mind. One evening, as they sat together in the mansion's library, Ethan turned to Alexander and said, I've decided. I want to live with you. Alexander's face lit up with a smile. Are you sure? Ethan nodded. Yes. I think this is what my mom would have wanted for me, and I think it's what I want too. Alexander placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his eyes filled with emotion. You won't regret this, Ethan. I promise to do everything in my power to give you the life you deserve. As they hugged, Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine, but he was ready to embrace the future with Alexander by his side. Ethan's move to Alexander's mansion marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The transition wasn't easy at first. Adjusting to a new home, a new school, and a new routine took time. But with Alexander's unwavering support, Ethan began to find his footing. The mansion, which had once felt cold and intimidating, slowly became a place of warmth and comfort for Ethan. Alexander gave him a spacious room filled with natural light, and together they decorated it with things Ethan loved: books, a telescope for stargazing, and a few framed photos of his mother. It was a space that felt uniquely his, a place where he could dream and grow. Alexander also made sure Ethan stayed connected to his roots. They visited his old neighborhood regularly, bringing groceries and gifts for the neighbors who had helped Ethan after his mother's passing. These visits reminded Ethan of where he came from and the resilience he had learned from his mother. At school, Ethan thrived. He was a bright and curious student, and the smaller class sizes allowed him to receive the attention he needed. He made new friends, joined the soccer team, and even started playing the piano, a hobby Alexander encouraged by hiring a private tutor. But the most significant change was the bond between Ethan and Alexander. What had started as an act of kindness had blossomed into a deep father-son relationship. Alexander, who had once been known for his cold demeanor, found himself smiling more, laughing more, and opening his heart in ways he never thought possible. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace in the library, Ethan turned to Alexander and said, "You know, I used to think I'd never be happy again after my mom died. But now, I think she'd be really proud of me. And of you." Alexander's eyes glistened with emotion. "I think she would be too, Ethan. You've come so far, and I'm so proud of the person you're becoming." Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. "You're like a dad to me now," he said softly. Alexander's heart swelled with love. "And you're like a son to me," he replied, pulling Ethan into a warm embrace. In that moment, both of them realized how much they had healed each other. Alexander had given Ethan a second chance at life, and Ethan had given Alexander a reason to open his heart again. Together they had formed a family, not by blood, but by love. Years passed, and Ethan grew into a confident, compassionate young man. He excelled in school, graduated at the top of his class, and earned a scholarship to a prestigious university. Alexander couldn't have been prouder. The boy he had met at the cemetery, broken and alone, had blossomed into someone extraordinary. But life had one more surprise in store for them. One summer afternoon, as Ethan was packing for college, he found an old dusty box in the back of his closet. Inside were some of his mother's belongings, things Alexander had carefully preserved when they cleaned out the apartment years ago. Among the items was a small, leather-bound journal. Curious, Ethan opened it and began to read. The journal was filled with his mother's thoughts, dreams, and memories. As he flipped through the pages, one entry caught his eye. It was dated just a few weeks before her passing. "Dear Diary, today I met someone who reminded me of the man I once loved. His name was Alexander Grant. We were young then, and life took us in different directions, but I've never forgotten him. I wonder if he ever thinks of me." Ethan's heart raced as he read the words. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. His mother had known Alexander? He rushed downstairs, journal in hand, and found Alexander in the study. "Alexander," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "Did you know my mother? Sarah Thompson?" Alexander looked up, startled by the urgency in Ethan's tone. "What? No, I don't think so. Why do you ask?" Ethan handed him the journal, pointing to the entry. Alexander's eyes widened as he read the words. His face paled and his hands began to shake. "Sarah. Sarah was your mother?" Alexander whispered, his voice barely audible. Ethan nodded. "Did you know her?" Alexander sank into a chair, his mind racing. "Yes," he said after a long pause. "I knew her. We were in love a long time ago, but we lost touch. I had no idea she was your mother." Tears filled Alexander's eyes as the pieces fell into place. The connection he had felt to Ethan, the inexplicable pull that had drawn him to the boy at the cemetery, it all made sense now. Ethan sat down beside him, his own eyes brimming with tears. "So, you're saying you could have been my father?" Alexander shook his head. "No, Ethan, I wasn't. But I wish I had been. I wish I had known about you sooner. I wish I could have been there for you and your mother." Ethan placed a hand on Alexander's shoulder. "But you're here now. and that's what matters." Alexander looked at Ethan, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude. "You're right," he said, "and I'm so thankful for that." In that moment, the two of them realized how extraordinary their journey had been. What had started as a chance encounter at a cemetery had turned into a life-changing bond, one that had healed their hearts and brought them together in ways they could never have imagined. As Ethan prepared to leave for college, he knew that no matter where life took him, he would always have a home with Alexander. And Alexander knew that in Ethan he had found not just a son, but a second chance at love and family. Together they had proven that even in the face of loss and heartbreak, the power of human connection could create miracles.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.